Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's make a quick run through the markets for you before we start the bulletin tonight. The NSE 20 over in Kenya in the red today. We're going to be talking about aviation in quite a bit of detail in the course of the hour. One thing you do need to know, though, is that Kenya Airways shares were down by about 0.9%, essentially heading towards a record low. Why? Because they issued a profit warning, which we'll discuss in just a moment. At this point in time, though, the funding plan for that renationalization plan that the Kenyan government has spoken about for so many months now is still not clear. Here's what's coming up tonight. The IMF is warning Ghana against pledging assets or future revenues to financial lenders. The House of Representatives is currently holding an impeachment debate ahead of a key vote against US President Donald Trump. And Egypt has launched its own online trading platform called Safina. Our starting point tonight, however, is in the world of public finances. The International Monetary Fund is warning Ghana's government to avoid collateralized borrowing as a way of reducing public debt. Now, simply put, that's a type of borrowing where institutions, or in this case, a country, pledges assets or future revenues, or in some cases both, to a lender that can be then called upon in case of a default or if expected revenues in the future are insufficient to pay off the debt they've acquired. Now, the IMF is reiterating that Ghana is still at high risk of debt distress and it needs to strengthen significantly both fiscal discipline and transparency as well. So let's explore this in a bit more detail. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai joins us now live from Accra with more detail. Nabil, walk us through how widespread this practice of collateralized debt across Ghana's government really is.
Ramah, this practice is not new in Ghana. We know that Ghana has natural resources when you talk about oil, when you talk about cocoa. And these are the natural resources that the government, subsequent governments have had to rely on to get these loans from multinational companies and even governments of other countries. So it's nothing new. It's actually widespread in Ghana. We know that even this year, Ghana had to rely on what it calls the cocoa syndicated loan, where it's actually secured a 1.3 billion loan from some financial institutions, international financial institutions, to prop up its cocoa sector. We know this particular loan is used to buy cocoa beans from farmers here in Ghana, and then it's being used to export. So it's actually widespread in Ghana, is nothing new, Ramah.
Indeed. So one such deal, however, that certainly has caught the eye of quite a few people is the deal that involves an agreement that gives the Chinese state-owned entity Sino-Hydro access to Ghana's bauxite resources in exchange for a $2 billion loan to fund infrastructure development. How and why was that deal arrived at?
So in July 2018, Ghana's parliament approved a facility that would see the construction of priority projects by Chinese firm Sino-Hydro Corporation. This meant that it was going to rely on or leverage on its bauxite reserves for that $2 billion amount by China. When this issue came up on the floor of Parliament, we know that the minority MPs were not quite happy that the country was going to leverage its bauxite for this particular deal. It actually had to even write to the IMF to find out clarity about this particular deal, whether it was a loan or a barter. And indeed, the IMF came out to state that it's actually a barter and not a loan, as the minority MPs were actually thinking about. Now, the current government said it had to strike this deal, this Sino-Hydro deal, because the country has infrastructure deficit of about 30 billion US dollars, and it's as a result of inadequate financial resources. So going for these collateral debt actually is going to be used for infrastructure projects in the country, and that's why we had to really resort to this particular deal from Sino-Hydro, Ramah.
Are there any efforts at the moment to try and renegotiate the terms of some of the debt that Ghana has on its books, including these collateralized debt facilities?
So when this particular government came into power, in 2016, it actually had to go through some of the deals signed by the previous administration, talking about the NDC, and it said there were some of the deals that they felt were not actually to the interest of the country. So indeed, there are some of the deals that are being renegotiated because this current administration thinks differently as compared to the previous NDC administration, which handed power to the new government in 2016. So there are some negotiations that are going on when it comes to some of the deals signed with Ghana's oil sector as well as the power sector as well. So indeed, we know that some renegotiations are ongoing with some of these deals that have been signed by previous administration.
Right. One last question for you, Nabil. This is more of a context question here. Ghana is a key exporter of a broad range of commodities. Gold is among the top 5 producers on the continent, second largest producer of cocoa. It's an oil producer. But its debt to GDP ratio has been rising steadily for years now. It's forecast to end this year 63% of GDP. With all those exports, what's Ghana borrowing for? And is there a plan to at least cut back on the volume of debt that the country has acquired?
So, Rama, basically, these borrowing are actually geared towards servicing Ghana's infrastructural deficit, which, as I said earlier, hovers around $30 billion US. The government feels is not able to generate enough resources internally and would have to resort to these other means of trying to bring in road infrastructure, hospitals, railway sector, and also boosting up the economy. So these are the reasons why the government had to resort to such avenues to bring development to the country. But we know that in the 2019 budget, as presented by the finance minister this year, we were told that the government is looking at implementing some rigorous internally generated funds or going deeply into tax collections in order to be able to service its own projects instead of going to borrow for such projects. We know that from next year, 2020, we are going to see some implementation of rigorous tax collection in the country to be able to to implement some of these projects that the government wants to do. Also, we know that aside that, the government is confident that 2020 looks positive for implementation of some of its projects, Rama.
Indeed. Let's see how this all plays out ahead of next year's elections. Nabil Ahmed Rufai there live in Accra. Now, we're still in West Africa. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has signed the 2020 budget into law. Now, this isn't just the country's largest ever budget. It's also the first one that he's ever approved on time without delay during his 2 terms in office. Now, the funding plan for the 2020 fiscal year includes new tax hikes from the nation's capital, Abuja. Philly Hazza has all the details.
The budget, tagged Budget of Sustaining Growth and Job Creation, is Nigeria's biggest bill ever, estimated at $29 billion. It tops the previous record spending plan of 2018 at about $25 billion. President Muhammadu Buhari, while presenting the budget to lawmakers on Tuesday, disclosed that the financial plan is based on the proposed increase in value-added tax VAT rate from 5% to 7.5%. According to President Buhari, the finance plan to increase VAT is targeted at helping the government generate more revenue from domestic tax to fund the huge bill. The additional revenue from the increase in VAT rate is meant to be used to fund healthcare, education and infrastructure. The president also revealed that the finance plan contains some notable provisions which is aimed at supporting micro, small and medium-sized businesses, something tax specialists say is a good move by the government.
It is a welcome idea because of the fact that majority of the small and medium scale enterprise are exempted from charging and remitting VAT. So that means that the poor people are not negatively affected. And it is a progressive tax.
Nigeria has one of the lowest tax rates in the world, and the government has struggled for years to raise revenues in Africa's top oil producer. VAT only accounted for about 10% of the federal government's revenue for its 2019 budget, and experts say VAT increment alone may not be significant in cushioning the country's recurrent expenditure, which stands at about 50% of the 2020 budget.
We're not making enough to even meet our recurrent expenditure. So if the federal government will actually meet its own recurrent expenditure, we need to expand our revenue generation greatly. Because if we can generate as much as 10 trillion to fund the budget, which is multiplying what we are currently doing by 2, then it is going to be so easy for all of our recurrent expenditure, the salary increase to be met.
Although the 2020 budget has now been signed into law, the finance plan to increase VAT still requires the approval from the lower chamber of the National Assembly and President Muhammadu Buhari before January 2020, when the budget will take full effect. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
A quick run through some company headlines now for you. Starting with De Beers, it sold $425 million worth of rough diamonds at its 10th and final sale of 2019 in Botswana. Now, according to Anglo-American, the figure represents a near 22% year-on-year decline. Anglo's De Beers unit will mine 1 million carats less than previously forecast in both 2020 and 2021, but the thing is that equates to less than 1% of global output. But it does slow the pace of the company's expansion as an oversupply of rough diamonds is weighing on prices right across the sector. Sudan's Nile Bank has signed a software supply deal with the US software company Oracle to provide a mobile banking platform. The deal is a sign that Sudan's economic ties with the US are thawing out after years of crippling sanctions. The United States did remove most of the sanctions on Sudan in October 2017, but it left in place restrictions linked to the conflict in Darfur and Washington's continued listing of Sudan as a state sponsor of terror. Kenya Airways says its earnings for the 2019 fiscal year are expected to fall by at least 25% or more. In a profit warning issued to investors earlier today, the troubled carrier attributes the loss in part to stiff competition, which necessitated price adjustments. It also says a newly introduced International Financial Reporting Standards rule, IFRS 16, has led to a decline in its margins. And MTN's mobile money service will go live in January in South Africa. The service will allow customers to send, receive, save money and pay for goods using their mobile phones. Last year, CEO Rob Schutte said that the company would relaunch mobile money services in South Africa 3 years after it canned the service. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Tunisia plans to introduce a range of economic reforms to boost growth. And we'll explore this marriage between Peugeot and Fiat Chrysler when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidoo. Hello, Naro.
This
Well, of course.
is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Tunisia's government has presented a study on reforms to be adopted to deal with a broad range of economic issues. Growth for this year, for instance, is forecast at just 1.5%. That's just half of the 2018 growth rate. Unemployment is also persistently high. It's close to 16% in general, but it's much, much higher among women and young people. With the details, here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi.
Tawfiq al-Rajhi shed light on the reforms that have been carried out by successive governments since 2015, indicating that these will help the next government work without pressure.
The minister in charge of major reform said 3 urgent reforms relating to solidarity and social economy, governance of state-owned enterprises and social protection should be implemented by the next government.
As for Tunisia's relationship with the International Monetary Fund, the minister noted that only 3 reforms were requested by the IMF.
They relate to the budget law, the establishment of an authority to fight corruption, and reforms in the penal system. Despite the economic and financial conditions faced by the country, 5 IMF reviews were successfully agreed upon under the Extended Fund Agreement 2016 to 2020.
The Tunisian president has been following the latest economic indicators. Qais Said met with the central bank governor in Carthage Palace. Marwan Al-Abbasi briefed the president about the country's current economic situation and the progress of the figures late in 2019.
The economic situation has improved in comparison to the same period last year, but more reforms still need to be implemented. I have informed the president about the positive impact likely to result from Tunisia's exit from the list of jurisdictions, subject to monitoring by the Financial Action Task Force.
Tunisia's major reforms were divided into 6 main areas relating to building state institutions, establishing constitutional bodies, as well as economic, institutional, financial and banking reforms, public finance and social reforms. The current reform plan provides for improving access to information, administrative services, the digitization of the administration and the reform of the subsidy system, as well as the governance of the state-owned enterprises. The reform of public companies will be made through financial restructuring. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, Egypt recently wrapped up the second phase of its Benban solar project. The North African state has been aggressively trying to invest in expanding its available electricity generation capacity. And it's doing that in part by luring in private sector developers into its renewable sector. CGTN's Uche Okoronkwo has those details.
Near Aswan, a broad strip of photovoltaic solar panels have been set up over a large area of desert that is visible from space. Situated in Benban, it is one of the world's largest solar parks following the completion of its second phase in November. The cost of the development is estimated at $2.1 billion.
This is the world's largest solar power plant anywhere. It's currently 1,465 megawatts AC that's delivered into the grid. It's almost 1,800 megawatts in terms of panel installation that's here. It's divided into currently 32 lots. There's an additional 8 lots still to be developed. which would take the park up to 1,800 megawatts delivered to the grid and 2,300 megawatts in terms of total capacity.
The plant has been designed to anchor the renewable energy sector by attracting foreign and domestic private sector developers. By providing Egypt's national grid with 1.5 gigawatts, it has helped bring down the price of solar energy as the government phases out electricity subsidies.
Well, the real legacy is that it's really the driving wedge of a private sector-led investment initiative that can reshape the electricity sector in Egypt. This is just the very beginning. They have plans to bring out renewable energy. Private sector invested across the Red Sea and in wind and throughout the deserts for solar power.
In 2013, Egypt suffered rolling blackouts following power shortages at aging power stations. However, that all changed after Siemens procured 3 gigantic power stations with a capacity of 14.4 gigawatts and turned it into a surplus. Despite plans to increase the share of electricity provided by renewables, Egypt has struggled to attract foreign investment outside the oil and gas sector. It hopes to boost the current share from a fraction to 20% by 2022 and 42% by 2035. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN.
Now, Fiat Chrysler has reached a binding agreement with the PSA Group, that's a company that essentially owns Citroën and Peugeot, on a merger estimated to be worth about $50 billion. The deal would make the partnership the 4th largest vehicle manufacturing group in the world. The two firms have yet to decide on a name for the newly formed company. They're working, however, on delivering a pledge to cut costs by over $4 billion a year without closing down factories. That's a very sensitive point. We'll get back to that in just a moment. Leaders from both Italy and France have expressed grave concern about potential job losses at the combined businesses. Together, they employ some 400,000 people.
This is a merger of two companies which have somewhat different motives. Peugeot is looking for size. They have not yet reached the first league of car makers, and that's exactly where they are heading for. Mr. Tavares' ambitions are so big that he wants to belong to the first league. As far as Fiat goes, technically, they are lagging behind so much that they simply need a partner. They had been openly looking around for some time, and Peugeot is in some ways what's left over.
All right, then, quite a bit to explore as far as this mega merger is concerned. Let's explore this in a bit more detail with CGTN's Stefan de Vries, who's in Paris right now at the moment. So, Stefan, from Peugeot's perspective and also from the perspective of the French government, which owns at least 14% of that company, why merge? What's the business case for being bigger?
Well, of course, PSA or Peugeot Citroën, the group, the French group, is one of the major players in Europe, but worldwide it is not very important. It is specialized in smaller cars in Europe, cars that don't really sell well in the USA, and of course it needs to expand, because that goes also for Fiat Chrysler, the Italian-American group, because there are many challenges ahead in the automotive industry. Of course, a lot of cars will probably be electrical, maybe even self-driving, autonomous, and Fiat Chrysler and PSA are not the strongest companies on the market on these topics, so they need each other. They need a bigger size to be able to invest and to cope with the challenges of the future, and also to make sure that they don't get behind their main competitors.
Indeed, and they do need to diversify. But how do unions in France view this deal? Are they in favor of it, or do they think this is a bad idea?
Well, they haven't really reacted. As you know, there are many strikes now in France considering the pension reform, so they're too busy with that. But the French economy minister, he has said that he was happy with the news today. It's good news for France, good news for Europe. That's what he said. But he also said that he expects the companies, the new company, the mega company, to keep their factories open. Now, We don't know all the details yet about how this is going to work out. The two companies, PSA and FCA, only needed less than 2 months to agree on the terms of their merger. So that shows that they are under huge pressure. Earlier this year, Fiat Chrysler wanted to get a marriage with Renault-Nissan, the other French car company. That stranded because the Japanese Nissan did not agree, and the French economy minister didn't agree either. So Fiat Chrysler was more or less desperate to find a partner. They have found one now, but it does show how big the pressure is on the market and on the car makers to find a solution and an answer to the future, because they also feel fresh competition. Newcomers like Apple and Google, tech giants, are also planning to launch in the automotive industry. So it's a very complicated market, and something apparently had to be done. And this mega merger is one of the results, or one of the answers to the pressure the companies are coping with.
Indeed. We'll get back to that EV question in just a bit, but let's get back to that target. They say they want to deliver $4 billion in cost savings, but they won't be cutting any factories, they won't be cutting jobs, they won't be closing any factories. I mean, it seems like they're talking out of both sides of their mouths here. Do analysts think this is a feasible target?
Well, yeah, no, of course, that's a big question today. Of course, there will be a lot of cost savings only because of the larger scale they can operate, and also the investments that will have to be made for producing electrical cars, for instance, that benefit now of the advantage of the merger. But yes, indeed, the company, the mega company, they produce now around 8.5 million cars a year. They have a capacity for about 13 million cars if you calculate all their factories of Fiat Chrysler and PSA. And yeah, of course, that's probably too many. And it's really very unlikely that they will keep their promise that they won't close any factories. But of course, the governments in Europe are very influential, and they need to be calmed down or to be reassured that all the jobs will be saved. But, well, considering the fact that this group will have much overcapacity, it's very likely that some factories will be closed in the future.
Indeed. One last question for you. So looking at their product range, Fiat Chrysler and even PSA itself, they're pretty much behind the curve relative to their competitors in terms of producing electrical vehicles. How big a priority is this for Peugeot to essentially electrify its entire range?
I think it's a top priority. Of course, electrical cars, they do well in cities. Peugeot already produces relatively smaller cars. Of course, in Europe, people drive smaller cars than in the Americas, for instance. So that's a good combination, small cars, electrical cars. But then again, people are also changing their mobility habits. In many cities around the world, there are now shared car schemes, shared bike programs. People also tend to wait, or at least to think about buying a car because of all the discussions about climate change. So there's a lot going on, and they will have to find an answer. So answering these concerns of the consumers and making their companies fit for the challenges of the next part of this century is an absolute top priority. And this merger has to contribute to the survival of Fiat Chrysler on the one hand and Peugeot Citroën on the other.
Indeed. Let's see how this plays out. Stefan de Vries in Paris. Thank you very much. Now, speaking of cars, if you're a fan of old vehicles, this is a story you will definitely take to heart. We'll introduce you now to a young Nigerian mechanic who's making waves in the country's commercial capital of Lagos by giving vintage cars there a complete makeover. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with this story.
This old Volkswagen Beetle should normally be meant for the junkyard, but Afam Dozier is working to turn it around, give it a completely new look. He's not your regular everyday mechanic. Dozier is a special kind of mechanic because of his area of specialty, giving vintage cars a complete makeover. For over 9 years, he's harnessed the skill taught him by his father, who's also into car fabrication.
I grew up with my dad, who is a mechanic and who has a workshop. So being a mechanic is not a force. It was a choice I had because I love the job. And I was trained by my dad in this profession, fabrication, construction, repairs and all.
Determined to carve a niche for himself, he chose to go fully into vintage car makeover rather than just being a usual mechanic. That decision led him to make some stern choices, including traveling as far as his quest to perfect the skill could take him.
Being in the university and not learning particularly what I wanted, I had to drop out. Dropping out was not easy, but because I had passion for it, I had to drop out and face the life squarely in my profession. And I traveled to India, New Delhi precisely, to learn more about refurbishing, upholstery, spraying, and more of the recent age mechanical technologies.
Afam literally works magic on any vintage car he gets hold of. So it's not surprising that in just 3 years, he's revamped 16 vintage cars and sold about 6.
I'm not based in a particular model of car or a brand. As long as it falls in between the 70s, 60s and below, I'm good to go. Once the engine is movable, the body is not a problem, because that's where I want to do more work, like to get it look differently from what it used to be.
Here's one of the vintage cars he's just revamped. It's a 1960 Volkswagen Beetle, all completely transformed and given a new look. And anytime Dozier hits the road like this, he draws attention to himself, and that is in fact a good marketing strategy.
Drive sometimes, even people who own more recent cars stop by to see what my own is looking like. And most of the videos, Nollywood videos, the musical videos, some still photos, they come to rent the car, and I'm making some good money out of it.
The challenges that come with this business are equally unique. Over time, Dozier has found a way to resolve these problems as they arise.
Sourcing the parts are not easy. Then sometimes when I don't get the exact part of what it should be, I improvise. So I can get a carburetor from a Nissan to work with a Golf. All I need to do is just to change the plate of the manifold, then get it work.
About 11 young people from across Africa are learning about car makeover in Dozier's workshop. With a growing customer base for his unique cars, it's a no-brainer that his business will certainly grow. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, they certainly don't make them like they used to. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up shortly. The House of Representatives is currently holding an impeachment debate ahead of a key vote against the US President, Donald Trump. And we'll tell you why medical practitioners have joined a nationwide strike in France.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's recap the stories making your headlines at this hour. Thousands of demonstrators have rallied in Algeria's capital against a newly elected president, Abdelmajid Tebboune. Now, they've expressed discontent over his offer for dialogue, indicating that, in their view, it's a ploy by the authorities to just consolidate and legitimize power. Security forces were heavily deployed, but there was no confrontation between them and the demonstrators. Over in the DRC, the UN has announced a plan to improve security in the northeastern province of Ituri. That's designed to allow the full resumption of Ebola prevention activities in the area. An unidentified militia group carried out 2 attacks on health facilities last month, prompting aid agencies there to suspend operations altogether. And finally, Tunisia's President Kais Saied has commemorated the start of the uprising that toppled the country's longtime autocrat, Zine El Abidine Ben Ali. Now, the independent academic was elected in a landslide victory in October. He has vowed to honor the demands of the revolution. He's promised to enact the key demands of that event: freedom, work and dignity within the framework of the Tunisian constitution. That's a run through your headlines. Now, at this hour, the United States House of Representatives has been debating impeachment rules ahead of a key vote against President Donald Trump. One lawmaker called the process a democracy-defining moment ahead of historic votes. Mr. Trump faces 2 charges, accusing him of abusing his power and obstructing a congressional investigation. Now, that would essentially make him only the 3rd U.S. president in that country's history to be impeached.
The President of the United States endangered our national security. The President undermined our democracy. And the President, a successor to the same office as George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, betrayed his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. These aren't opinions. These are uncontested facts. The evidence is as clear as it is overwhelming. If a president undermining our national security and using the federal government for his own selfish personal gain is not impeachable conduct, then, Madam Speaker, I don't know what is.
Well, this is going to be an interesting event to follow. Let's get you the latest details on this. Jim Spellman is following developments in Capitol Hill. Jim, what's the latest from the House at the moment?
Yeah, Ramah, they've been at it for about 4.5 hours. They'll do this for about another 5 or 6 hours, debating those 2 articles of impeachment before an expected vote sometime around perhaps 7 p.m. local time here. Democrats say they do have enough votes to pass both articles of impeachment. It'll be a tough vote for some of the more moderate Democrats that are in districts that President Trump carried, that they were able to win office in late last year. We know that one Democrat is expected actually to switch parties to the Republican Party. Meantime, we know that President Trump is going to travel today to Michigan for one of his rallies. He's expected to speak in Michigan around the same time as this vote here on Capitol Hill. Could be a dramatic split-screen moment here on a historic day in Washington, Ramah.
Indeed. So the Senate as well, they're yet to agree on the procedure for the trial that may follow essentially in January. What do both parties want done in that instance?
So the Democrats would like to hear from a couple of witnesses that they've not yet heard from over here in the House, including the acting chief of staff at the White House, Mick Mulvaney, as well as the former National Security Advisor, John Bolton. So far, the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, is not open to that. There's a lot of back and forth going on. There has been some reporting that President Trump would like to see a broader trial in the Senate that he feels could perhaps vindicate him, not only lead to the expected acquittal, but there's no indication that Mitch McConnell is open for that at this point.
So Republican voters, though, from some of the polls that I've been looking at, 538, for example, Nate Silver's team there, Republican voters really are not being moved by this impeachment probe so far. So why are they standing with the president?
Well, you know, they see this largely as an assault on a president that Democrats did not support from the get-go. So they see this whole effort by Democrats as a way of negating that election back in 2016. They also complain a lot about the process going forward. It's really not clear what will happen with that thin strip of voters that are in the middle, but so far President Trump shows little sign of losing his base of supporters in the Republican Party. We should see them on display loud and clear at his rally tonight, Ramah.
Indeed. So one last question for you, Jim. The Democrats do know that the odds of the president being removed from office in a trial in the Senate are pretty essentially slim to none. So let's assume for argument's sake that that does happen. He remains in office. How do they then leverage that going into the 2020 elections?
Well, I think that's the huge question mark here, and it's not without risks. If they're seen as overreaching come election time next year, could backfire on them. But clearly, being impeached, even if he is, as expected, is acquitted, is a huge stain on the presidency. It will be a topic of conversation throughout the entire election cycle. So I think that's one of the big question marks here is if, as predicted, this moves to the Senate and President Trump is acquitted, what impact will that have on next year's election? I think that is something that has yet to be answered at all. Ramah?
Indeed. Jim Spellman in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much. Now, of course, you will be seeing a lot more from our colleagues over in Washington, D.C. as that debate does continue. Now, as nationwide protests continue against France's pension reforms push, medical practitioners have now joined the movement. They're condemning the shortage of government funding for hospitals and public healthcare. Patients, they say, are waiting for hours on stretchers, and some, they say, have even died waiting in hospital corridors. Holly Hudson reports from Paris.
In the centre of Paris, a rallying cry by medics from across the country, condemning a crisis they claim is killing public hospitals and putting patients' lives at risk.
Beds are closing, people are waiting for hours in stretchers. Some people died waiting in hospital corridors. And the Minister of Health, Agnès Buzyn, has given us answers, but they absolutely aren't enough to meet our claims.
In my service, we are understaffed. Every day we have trouble working because of that. We don't have beds and enough space for the patients, so we have to let them out even though they are sick, and it could be dangerous.
We can't recruit any staff anymore. We've no nurses left. Even the young ones don't want to come anymore. That means we have to close beds, meaning we can't afford to take care of the population and ensure safe and basic care.
An emergency package unveiled by the Prime Minister last month promised over €1 billion in extra funding and bonuses, but protesters say it doesn't go far enough, and now hundreds of doctors are threatening to resign.
This is only the latest demonstration by health workers who have been on strike since March, and it comes on the same day as another mass protest by people from other professions, including teachers, transport workers and firefighters, all of whom are angry over government plans to overhaul the pension system.
Nationwide stoppages have crippled the country's public transport network for 13 days, and unions are threatening to continue strikes over Christmas unless the government pulls its plans.
They want us to be the ones to bring in a pause? No, it's up to the government to say stop, to press the stop button, to pause this points-based pension system.
The Prime Minister is expected to meet unions on Wednesday to try and agree a truce to stop Christmas travel plans being derailed. But at the moment, there's no end in sight, leaving France facing a winter of discontent. Holly Hudson, CGTN, Paris.
The world shipping industry is planning a $5 billion research fund to help cut carbon emissions. Now, the fund will work by charging members of the International Shipping Associations around $2 per tonne on the fuel they use in their vessels to finance the development of much cleaner fuels. The global shipping fleet at the moment accounts for more than 2% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's under immense political pressure to cut them down. Here's CGTN's Richard Bestick with this report from London.
90% of world trade is transported by sea. A huge global fleet of massive container ships making that trade possible. Powered, though, by a heavy diesel, the dirtiest of fuels according to the UN's International Maritime Organization, the IMO. Now, 7 shipping associations are clubbing together in the hope of developing a cleaner technology to radically cut emissions.
Well, we set ourselves ambitious targets. We need to cut our emissions by 50% for 2050, which actually means with the growth in world trade, that we've got to get 90% efficiency savings on our ships. And the only way we're going to achieve that is by zero carbon fuel. So at the moment, it's not available at scale. It's not the technology is still in its nascent form. So we really need to kickstart that supercharge that research so that we're able to meet those ambitious targets.
The shipping industry finds itself under scrutiny from the IMO regulator and bodies like the European Union. While its fleet of some 250 million tonnes usually sails out of sight on the high seas, it is regarded as a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Change, though, will bring extra costs.
So we've thought that through. This has been under development for a couple of years now, and we're advocating a mandatory research and development contribution. So every tonne of fuel a ship burns, there's a contribution is made into the fund. We want to turn good intentions into a hard reality.
That will require agreement from all the International Chamber of Shipping's 38 members. Everything under the Christmas tree, indeed just about everything we touch, has arrived at its destination by ship. So the shipping industry globally is under intense political pressure to clean up its environmental act. This new initiative may be just the beginning of that. Richard Bestick, CGTN, London.
On to Southeast Asia now, in Vietnam, where a young entrepreneur has found an environmentally friendly alternative to plastic straws. He essentially converts hollow grass into reusable, biodegradable straws. Yes, CGTN's Alexandra Majala with the details on what's hot tonight.
Tran Minh Thien runs his company 3T from a village deep in the Mekong Delta region, 50 kilometers west of Ho Chi Minh City. Here, the 32-year-old is surrounded by all the wild hollow-stemmed grey sedge grass he needs. He uses the grass to make drinking straws. However, his noble business concept comes with a major challenge.
I came up with a grass straw as a solution to temporarily replacing plastic straws and reducing part of their damage to the environment. However, in the long term, the grass straw does not solve the pollution problem, nor does it have the characteristics required to become the solution to protect the environment, because the grass doesn't grow fast enough.
Thien and his workers, most of whom come from the village, handpick the grass from the surrounding swampland and then cut them into 20-centimeter long pieces. They then set them out to dry over a 2 to 3 day period or bake the grass in an oven.
I saw on TV that a whale ate those plastic straws and nylon bags and died. From then on, I started working on this, and it's like I'm helping the community.
Thien started his business in 2017, and 3T produces around 3,000 grass straws a day. The straws are sold for a few cents each, earning the modest firm $400 per month after costs such as labor, tax, and insurance. According to Thien, his dried grass straws can be used for up to 6 months. This concept is slowly taking root amongst Vietnamese consumers.
I think switching from using plastic straws to grass straws is quite an innovative move, but it will take a while for everyone to get used to using grass straws or other environmental friendly products.
According to a 2015 study by the University of Georgia, Vietnam has a very obvious addiction to plastic and is the 4th largest contributor to marine plastic pollution globally. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices. So, all things being equal, 2019 is not a bad year at all for commodities. Brent crude up 18%, coffee with a late rally that's essentially coming into Q4, up 15%, platinum and gold up by a similar number as well. Copper not doing particularly well, comparatively speaking. The LME contract barely 3.7% higher so far in the year. But the palladium market, absolutely nuts, 71.5% higher, and that's after cracking the $2,000 an ounce mark just 24 hours ago. Here's what's coming up shortly. Egypt launches its very own trading platform online called Safina. And we'll explore why Ghanaians aren't quite ready yet to let go of single-use plastic bags.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Inspired by the success of China's Alibaba, Egypt has launched its own version of an online trading platform. They're calling it Safina, which translates to ship in at least 2 languages that I know of. Now, the platform is Egypt's take on marketing its local products worldwide. And it offers a variety of plastic and metal products as well as popular Egyptian exports from furniture to handmade carpets. Here's CGTN's Adel El Marouki with more on Grassroots Tonight.
Earlier this year, a group of young Egyptians established a startup to market Egyptian products online. Inspired by Chinese giant Alibaba, they hope they too can help their country's economy grow.
We have seen how Alibaba transformed small and medium enterprises and the reflection it had on China's economy. We have many industries in Egypt which no one knows about, but then we find Egyptian traders going to import similar products. Foreign merchants do not know Egypt has these products and would go elsewhere to buy them.
But since they launched their website in March, after 9 months of operation, they say they have only put 50 producers online, while they've signed agreements with more than 200.
In Egypt, we have a problem with the data. Many got excited to join us, but then we see them sending us mobile pictures of their products, which is not the image we want for Safina. We were forced to get the tools to professionally picture these products and still do it for free to accelerate the data collection.
It may be a slow start for a big dream. Safina founders believe they have a great potential to grow.
Egypt is at the center of the trade world. We are a hub. Instead of importing all the way from the extreme east or west, why not save time and cost and import the same products from Egypt? Our industrial sector can cover that demand.
The website is also targeting Egyptian importers. They hope that having a wider variety of Egyptian products online would encourage local importers to purchase their goods domestically. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And finally, Ghana, like many other African countries, is grappling with a plastic waste crisis. The country is yet to ban single-use plastic products like countries like Rwanda or Kenya have, but efforts are underway to address the problem. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai found this report from Accra.
Plastic pollution on Accra Beach. According to the United Nations, Ghana produces 1.7 million tons of plastic waste annually. Only 2% of it is recycled, meaning that a lot ends up in the environment. Senna MFA Zaglo started producing handmade paper bags last year to tackle plastic pollution in Ghana.
We buy food a lot by the roadside, and a lot of these food vendors prefer to use rubber bags or polythene bags because it's quite cheaper. And that is one of the reasons why there are a lot of rubber bags around.
Senna MFA says plastic bags are becoming unpopular due to the dangers they cause to the environment and aquatic life. However, many Ghanaians are yet to wholly embrace paper bags for their shopping.
Paper bags are a bit expensive as compared to polythene bags, so it's gradual. They are not embracing it altogether.
These paper bags cost between 35 cents and $1.20. Senna MFA Azaglo produces 200 paper bags a day. She hopes to get that daily number up to 1,000 as the business expands. But some environmental experts say switching to paper bags may not entirely solve Ghana's plastic pollution.
When it comes to paper bags or alternatives to plastic bags, I believe that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So the idea is to first of all refuse to take the plastic. So if you go out there to buy something, try and refuse taking plastic bags. Now if you can't refuse the plastic bag, then you need to reduce how much of it you take. In as much as possible, you want to reuse what you have already taken.
Over 15 African countries have either banned or taxed the use of plastic shopping bags. But Ghana's government says it has no plans to ban plastics due to its contribution to the economy. Senna MFA Zaglo, however, hopes when the government bans plastics, the mass production of paper bags will help bridge the economic gap. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Just one quick note for you as far as the currencies are concerned. Ghana's cedi has been one of the currencies we've been keeping a very, very close eye on this program the entire year. And it's also the worst performing against the American dollar so far, down by about 16% in the last 12 months. As we head into elections in that country next year, the big question is going to be what direction will that dollar cedi cross head in? That's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us. All of them are on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.